So that actually leads to a question that I have for you. Like, as so your dominant function is introverted thinking.
Yeah.
Um, so that's something that's not always. It's not always clear to me when I'm using introverted thinking or when how that's like it's hard for me to isolate, I guess, in a way. Um,
Yeah.
so, I mean, do you find that is that mostly how you would characterize it? That it's, solving problems, like solving tangible problems, and kind of applying your um, your knowledge of how things work to a particular problem and trying to sort out what's.
Yeah. That's kind of how I see it. Just like trying to trying to figure stuff out. It's kind of like the best way I
Yeah,
could just the simplest way I could describe it. Um, but I mean, it does work in conjunction with my other functions.
yeah,
Um, like I would use extroverted sensing to take in details, like external details.
yeah,
Because like you can't solve problems if you have no information. So,
right,
and then at the same time, there's introverted intuition, um,
yeah,
where I have to so I have all these details. I have to do something with it, and like I could you know if my TI is just going like one step at a time, that's totally inefficient. I have to at some point it
right.
helps a lot if I can see something, see a big picture with all these details, and then I
That
can
makes sense.
I can take that and then process it. Um,
Hmm.
because like for me, NI is something that I don't trust by itself, just because it is
I
it
don't
is a
either,
tertiary function.
frankly.
um, but yeah, I think
That's
the
not completely true, but
yeah, but with NI, it's like I get this sudden flash of revelation, and
yeah.
it's like, well, I still have to test it. Does it make
Yep.
sense? And so that's
Yeah,
what
exactly.
yeah.
I
So
believe
that's what
that as well. I mean, I think for me probably that happens a lot more often that for me I have those kinds of flashes of insight. That's sort of a typical way that my brain works. Where I do get just hunches about things where I think, oh, this is probably what's going on there or whatever. Um, I tend to um, I tend to think of things in that big picture way where I just get something all at once. Um, but and I can trust my intuition. Like I can trust it to be based on something. Like it's not like I'm not sure if that's always clear. Because as we were talking about earlier with people who don't, thinkers not always understanding feelers, and I think people who are not intuitive, they might see intuition as being just sort of like, well, you're just making stuff up. Like that's not like where is that coming from? Like it can create a sort of suspicion. Um, but because of some experiences I had when I was younger, where I don't think it was actually NI. I think it was sort of maybe more of an SE thing, where I went through a period where I would just do things, like I would just try things, or I would just move, like I just moved across the country, or I just would do, and it wasn't because I was truly following my intuition, like I wasn't truly listening to some inner voice that was saying like this is where like this is because with the way that I use introverted intuition now, I can actually sort of project out into the future and see kind of step by step like, okay, this is where I'm going to be in 5 years, or this is where this is going to lead to. um, but back then I didn't think that far ahead at all. Like I would just like in the moment say like I want to move to the West Coast, and I would just like do it. But I think that was because of it, because of in my youth trying to sort of find my way and trying to sort of figure out, like I wasn't very mature, because of some of the experiences that I had where I felt, um, I just felt like I had to, I don't know, I felt like I had to just do stuff without thinking about it in order to have anything happen.
was it kind of you felt kind of constrained by your your situation?
Yeah, and I definitely reacted against that. I mean, I definitely, I was very sheltered growing up, and because I was so shy, like I think what would have been more probably what would have been healthier and more productive is if I had like a network of people in my life that I could go to for advice, or that I could bounce ideas off of, or who would kind of, you know, counsel me as far as like, well, that might not be a good idea and here's why. But I was very stubborn. Like I did not trust anybody. Like I wouldn't listen to my
Okay.
parents. I wouldn't listen to anybody. I was sort of like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I know I'm not going to listen to what any of these other people are telling me to do. So, and part of it was because I was so shy. Like I just didn't, I never had, a huge amount of people in my life that I could draw. Like I always just had a handful of people that I was close to. Um, and so I never made decisions based on, well, what are my friends doing, or what, I didn't really have that. So I would just sort of do things, impulsively just for the experience, because I did have this kind of half-baked intuition that I was only going to figure anything out if I experienced stuff. And then, because I had a sense that that was where I was going to get like the input that I needed in order to build a sense at all of how things worked, because I knew that I didn't understand how anything worked. I was really clueless, very, very clueless. And because my inclination is just to read books, I knew that that was limited in its ability to actually help me figure out how to live day-to-day life. So my sense was, well, just like try stuff and see what happens. I don't recommend this strategy, by the way. There's a lot
Yeah.
of unforeseen consequences to rash decisions when you don't
Yeah.
really think things through at all. So, but
Yeah. Supposedly SPs are good at it.
yeah, SPs are really good at. That's the thing is, for me, like extroverted sensing is my inferior function, and I think especially back then, um, it wasn't a strength or anything. That's the thing. I was just sort of like haphazardly going through life, just like try this, try that, and I don't have that. Um, somebody who is more adept at taking in information and observing dynamics and things like that, they're probably going to come up with more solid information that they can then use to make decisions or whatever. But for me, I could tell that I could tell I wasn't particularly good at this, but I didn't really see what my other options were. So, but to go back to what we were talking about, I have learned to develop my intuition now, where I do think that it's very reliable. And to me, it feels like knowledge. It doesn't feel it feels like something I know that I can know. It doesn't feel like just sort of a crazy loopy idea that's sort of like, oh well, that sounds good. It's not like that at all. It's a lot of times what happens is I'll know something, but I don't know why I know it, but I know it. Um, and and I think introverted thinking will come into play when I'm actually trying to break down and analyze, categorize, and figure out like, well, how does this fit into what I already know, or where am I actually, like, usually I can trace back and figure out why I think something, what experiences I've had that have led me to that conclusion, or what I'm perceiving in my environment, what I'm perceiving in dynamics between people that would make me think something in particular. So it's not like a psychic ability or something like that. I've seen it described that way. It has never felt that way to me.
Okay. It sounds like you use your TI and NI in the same way that I do, except in just in the opposite order.
Which makes
It's like,
sense,
yeah,
yeah.
because like for me it's like you're talking about using like you get this these flashes of intuition, and then you use your TI to figure out what it is.
Yep.
Whereas in my case, I'm already using TI to try to figure something
Yep.
out, and then I might get this burst of intuition. Oh, I can use that. Okay.
Ah, yeah, that makes total sense. That really does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but you actually, yeah, you were saying something that just a minute ago that kind of um, got me interested in the topic of going back to the topic of mistypes about
Yeah.
how or misunderstandings of certain functions, particularly in your case SE.
Yeah.
Um, and a lot of people think that SE is like the function that makes you want to do stuff, or makes you want to just go out and be reckless and experience
Mm,
things, and that's why SPs are known as the experiencers. Now, in most
right.
in most SPs cases, that is true, but I think the reason other types view SPs as being reckless is because if they tried to do the same things themselves, it would be reckless, like in
That's
your case.
right. Yeah, that's really insightful. Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, and like
Yeah.
being raised like my mom's, like a total ESFJ, and and she would just always like just try to keep me safe, make sure I knew how to be safe, and so like
Right.
those values got ingrained in me, and so whenever I would think about things that SPs like to do, it's like, well, those are that is being reckless and being immature, and so I wouldn't even bother trying it myself just because like
Right.
I didn't have the confidence in myself to to actually go out and and kind of live life and live in the outside world and try to be able
Mm.
to be able to experience things and know how to handle it as I go along.
Exactly. Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense because I think you're right that that for a lot of extroverted sensors that they're really in their element when they're kind of making decisions on the fly and they're just kind of reacting to some kind of extreme challenge. That's this that they have this confidence in their ability to handle the unknown in their physical environment, and that actually, they have a good reason to have that confidence because they can do things like um, these sort of challenging physical things and find that
Mhm.
that it was fun, that it was that it was
Yeah.
you know and so yeah, so it doesn't necessarily feel reckless to them because they're in their element. They're like, no, I can handle this, and most of the time they're right, I think. um
Yeah. Or even if something bad happens, they can recover from it.
exactly, and that's the thing. They I think you're right that confidence is really key when it comes to extroverted sensors who gravitate towards those kinds of physical challenges or whatever, that their sense is whatever happens, I think I admire this totally. Like, to me, this is something I've tried to develop a little bit, just enough to where I can function in life. Because the way that I was when I was younger, I had so much self doubt in my ability to handle even um, basic everyday life type stuff. I just because I would always like I would have that, and I like possibilities, like I would generate possibilities. Well, this could happen and then that would happen. And because of some experiences I had where I was younger, where unpredicted things happened and I didn't know what to do, I tended to be sort of um, I'd have a very negative sense of what could happen, and I didn't have a lot of confidence in my ability to handle, like, if something negative happened, because I always felt like I would just shut down if anything happened that I couldn't handle. As someone who's really in my head. Oh, are you?
There.
Can you hear me?
Oh shoot. What is
Uh
going on here?
oh. There
Can you
you
hear me?
are. Yep.
Okay. Let's see if I can
So
fix.
I was probably rambling on for a while there
Yeah, I still wanted to hear it though.
before I realized that it was frozen.
Oh shoot, that looks pretty bad. Yeah. Okay. Trying a few suggestions on how to prevent that from happening. I think it's happening on my end.
Oh, okay.
Um, Anyway, so uh, so yeah, back to what you were talking
Um,
about your,
yeah,
your
so
confidence in your experiences, I guess.
yeah, yeah, I always just had a sense that I would shut down if anything
Mm,
unpredicted happened. Like it's one of the things that like I went through a long period of my life where I felt I like over prepared for everything. Like
okay.
I would research everything to death. Like I still do this to some extent, but I'm less fearful about like I do have more confidence in my ability to just sort of like, well, I'll just handle it if I could, because you can never prepare for every contingency. Like it's impossible, and so you do kind of have to let that go at some point and say, well, stuff is going to happen that I'm not going to expect, and I'm just going to have to deal with it. So I
Mm,
do that now more, but I'm impressed with people who just naturally have that confidence that, well, whatever happens, I'll just handle it, it'll be fine, because I do
hmm.
think that that tends to be true for them, that they really are able to just handle stuff when it happens. But
Yeah, and I didn't even, like I said, it was only a year ago that I figured out that was an ISTP and that I
right.
had, had this ability. So like I
Yeah.
most of my life I didn't have that confidence.
Yep.
Even though looking back now, I can see incidents where I was able to handle stuff that
Yeah.
maybe other people couldn't handle. Um,
Ah.
but yeah, I mean, it just goes back to just my upbringing and thinking I had to stay safe and just
Yeah.
do things to protect myself, and so like I
Right.
would just kind of live my life that way, and then I would still have these tendencies to go off and do stuff on my own, and like, ooh, I'm living dangerously, and just just because I'm going off and venturing out on my own.
So you still did have certain impulses to do things a certain way. It just was probably more controlled, or more,
Yeah,
like you did have a certain comfort zone or whatever where you could express your personality. Because I
yeah,
think that, I mean, that actually makes sense, because I think, we can't actually change our preferences, but I think you're right that there's certain things in our upbringing or certain things in our experiences that can sort of influence our confidence level or influence our perception of ourselves, or different things like that can make um, our personality traits play out in different ways. I think our experiences are somewhat similar, because I know for me, I didn't have a lot of confidence when it came to my extroverted feeling, which is my auxiliary function.
hmm,
And I had experiences when I was younger that, well, there were different things. Like, first of all, I'm really different from everybody else in my family. Um, and so I don't think I ever really cultivated my I don't think I cultivated that side of myself as much as I would have, maybe, if there are no other extroverted feelers in my family except for my one sister, who I think is an ESFJ. Um,
okay,
and I was very shy growing up. I don't know what causes shyness, but I don't think all INFJs are necessarily shy. But I was very shy, and so I had a lot of inhibitions when it came to talking to people, talking to strangers, or I didn't have any sense at all that I could just walk up to somebody and start talking to them. That was that was crazy. It would be like if you were like, yeah, I'll just jump out of this plane, like that'll be fine because I have extroverted sensing, so I could say, like, I did not have that sense that that was something I would be able to do. Um, and and then I had this experience in college where I experienced a lot of hostility from other people and rejection.
oh, okay,
And I was really sensitive. Like that had a big effect on me, I think, where I was just like, um, where I think a lot of people, if you had a typical INFJ who was shy, I would think that going away to college would really be the time to blossom. That would be the time when you would make new friends and you would develop confidence in your ability to, connect with people. And for me, it was the opposite experience. I was just sort of like,
hmm.
man, people are not worth it. Like it's just, like it's just so much trouble. Like it's just so much, you know, um, the way that I used my extroverted feeling at the time is I could tell when people had negative reactions to what I was saying. So, you know, when I was at this Christian college, and I would just, you know, like as an introverted intuitive, just kind of throw out things like, well, what if this is true? Or why don't we look at it from this perspective? And it was just like total hostility, like, you know, like why would you think that? Why are you undermining our beliefs? Or like, you know, sort of like, you know, and as an extrovert, like as someone who has a preference for extroverted feeling, like I want harmony with other people. Like I don't want to cause trouble. I don't want to argue. Like to me, that's not productive at all. And I found myself provoking these hostile reactions in people. And I think I just kind of shut down a bit where I just didn't I just had this fear of even engaging people, I think, to some extent. So, and yet at the same time, I was really aware that, you know, you really do have to have some level of social proficiency to like make it in life at all. And so I would sometimes try to learn how to come out of my shell and everything, but I just didn't have a lot of confidence though in that area.
Yeah, I mean it's really interesting though, like how your story there just ties in with your story about your journey of faith, and like as I was, you know, when you were talking about, you know, facing hostility, I was just before you said it, I was thinking it didn't have anything to do with, you know, people questioning your beliefs or anything.
Yeah.
Like that. I was like, yeah, but you know, because my experience is totally different. It's like, you know, I grew as a Christian when I was in college, and so that's where, you know, that's where I made a lot of friends and developed, you know, my horrible social skills, you know, which are still, you know, pretty bad nowadays. But yeah, I mean that's kind of where I learned to become more social and become more confident about, you know, about talking to people.
Yep.
Yeah. So, you know, where was I going with that? But yeah, just being more confident about using your functions, and you know, for me, SC, like I would when I became an adult, I would go on these road trips by myself.
Yep.
And like my mom would just, you know, she would like just, you know, kind of she'd probably freak out more than she let on, but she would still like talk, you know, every time she would just go like, you know, be careful when you're out at night, or, you know. There's a lot of creepy people out there, or, you know, if I'm traveling to, like, you know, if I'm driving out to the desert, like, watch out for rattlesnakes. You know, it's like I think my dad is secretly an ISTP.
Why secretly?
Because he tested as ISTJ on the one test I gave him, which looking back now, I think was probably a bad test to give him.
Yeah, didn't you test as ISTJ?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I bet, because like the reason I think he's ISTP is because he seems like way too laid back for an ISTJ. Just
ISTJs are pretty laid back, actually. I think the descriptions are really the worst for ISTJs.
Yeah.
It's a pet peeve of mine.
Well, when I say laid back, I just mean like just kind of able to go with the flow and not be
right. Yeah. Okay.
Be a certain way.
Yeah.
And he was way more mechanical than I ever was. Like I remember when I was a kid, he would just spend like most of the weekend just in the garage, building stuff. Like working with wood. Like he had like this huge electric table saw that I was afraid of, and so he would just build stuff around the house, and also from what I knew of him, from what I've heard from before he met my mom, he would do things like he took a job, like a temporary job on the other side of the country. He drove a Corvette, like a 1960s Corvette. He drove it across the country by himself, and then that job ended. And then he would just once the job ended, he would just drive all the way back, and then.
Well, my dad is an ISTJ, and he would not do any of those things. So.
Yeah, and plus
that sounds more like ISTP to me.
Yeah, just so many things I've observed in him.
Yeah.
And just him as a dad, kind of reminds me of like how I think I would be as a dad, which is basically just let the mom do all the work. So that's basically why I was raised by my mom. While
Okay.
my dad was just kind of there, and he would teach me to do the stuff that my mom wasn't capable of teaching me, like like how to play chess, how to play poker, how to ride a bike, how to drive.
Okay.
I remember driving lessons with my mom. It was just her just going, ooh, ooh, oh, 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 and I'm like, what? I was like, okay, Dad, you teach me. But yeah. So my dad like what point was I making? What was I talking about before that?
You were
Um,
talking about how he's you think he's a secret ISTP because he actually tested as ISTJ, but then you started describing all of the ISTP-ish things that he
okay,
has
yeah,
actually done.
I remember where I was going with that. It's because he used to enjoy camping,
Uh-huh.
and so like when I was really little, like like from like age 3 to about maybe 6, it would take me maybe a few like one camping trip a year,
Uh-huh.
and I know now that it was totally my dad's idea. So we had like he had this 4x4 Chevy Blazer,
Hmm.
1974 Blazer, and he was into fishing, and we would just like find this campsite. I vaguely remember getting like my dad getting us lost,
Hmm.
and just having to find whatever campsite we could find,
Uh-huh.
and there were like a couple of incidents that I don't even remember, but my mom has talked about, where like we encountered a rattlesnake. Um,
Hmm.
so the way my mom describes it is the rattlesnake almost killed me. so, so I'm pretty sure I was like safely like just kind of sitting in the truck, like not in any danger at all, and this rattlesnake just kind of shows up at our campsite, and I think my dad either scared it away or shot it with his pistol.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I was like, oh, wow, I wish I could remember that.
I can't believe you don't.
I was like, yeah, I was like, you'd think I'd remember at least remember a gun going off or something.
Right?
Yeah, if I was actually there to witness it, yeah, I'm pretty sure I'd remember it. But yeah, my mom was like, according to my mom, like I was totally in danger of being bitten by a rattlesnake, and so it was either that incident, and there was another incident where I was in
Uh-oh.
an environment like it was a one-story house, like and the backyard was just all flat grass, and so I wasn't used to running on uneven ground. And so I was running around our campsite carrying this stick which had jagged edges. And
Uh-huh.
so inevitably I tripped and I fell and I hit, poked the stick
Oh
in my
no.
forehead. Like I think I missed my eye about an inch.
Oh
So
no.
I think, after incidents like that, and I got hurt a couple of other times.
Uh-huh.
My mom was like, okay, no more of this camping stuff. This is not safe. So, um, yeah, so
Uh,
that's basically how my mom raised me, just to always warn me about dangers, and
right.
how to avoid getting hurt. Um,
Hmm.
and
Yeah, that's interesting. So, but your dad, you think, um, he doesn't, is he more like you where you think he's an ISTP, but he's not necessarily fits the stereotype as much or as far as the like, um,
yeah, I think I would guess he probably grew up with SJ values, kind of like I did.
yeah, a lot of people do. I
Yeah,
did.
and and from what I've heard. So like
You're,
his parents
I'm sorry, you're freezing.
my
I missed some of that
oh, okay.
because you
Uh,
froze a couple times.
okay. So yeah, I was talking about how I think my dad probably um, because
I'm sorry, your dad probably,
um, hmm? Oh, did I cut out again?
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I got to figure out how to fix that. Um, yeah, so I suspect my dad probably grew up with SJ values,
Yeah.
because from what I've heard, people who grew up in Asian cultures tend to take on SJ values just because it is, like Japan has a very SJ sort of feel,
Okay.
or like I like especially like particularly like I people think Japan is like ISTJ.
Oh, okay.
Um, I made a video about that where I suspect my last name derived from the letters ISTJ.
I saw that. That was great.
um, so yeah, I think that's probably the only reason my dad tested as ISTJ. But like
Is
pretty much
that the one that was all about a family curse? The ISTJ?
yeah. I am Master ISTJ Sensei. A lot of people got a kick out of that.
That is
But yeah.
funny. Yeah, I don't know. I think it can be kind of hard to type parents and family members just because it's you know them really well, but at the same time, it's I don't know. Your dynamic with your family isn't always the most typical. There are
Oh yeah.
because a lot of parents are going to put themselves in a mode where they're trying to transmit. I mean, part of parenting is transmitting values to your children, so that could take on kind of an SJ feel, regardless of the personality types of the people. Maybe it's just, and then again, as you're saying, like cultural values may play into that to some extent. Like I had a theory that the church that I grew up in, everyone is an ESTJ or an ESFJ. All of the guys are ESTJs and all of the women are ESFJs. Like, and it's that rigid, like, 'cause men think and women feel, like, and everybody's an extrovert and everybody's a judger and everybody's a censor. Like, intuition is scary, introversion is suspicious, perceiving is like, that's what, you gotta make, you gotta be rigid about this stuff,
Yeah, I've been to churches like that.
Really, yeah. Yeah, it's so it's interesting because that did influence me, I think, growing up in that environment. But my parents, I always said that like the church that I grew up in is very rigid, but my parents are not very rigid,
Okay.
which I am grateful for because I was able to maintain a relationship with them even though, I had my issues with their church. So,
Well,
but
what types are your parents? I don't think you mentioned your parents' types.
yeah, I believe my dad is an ISTJ and my mom is an ESFP.
Oh, okay. Oh, interesting.
I think, and my dad is, I think, in many respects, a typical ISTJ. He's an accountant, and he's very kind of by the book, and he is very, I don't know. He's very, I don't know. But the actual descriptions for ISTJs I can't stand because I think they make it sound like ISTJs are just like automatons, they're just sort of marching through life like I must do my duty, it's like and my dad actually is a pretty laid back guy, and everything. So, and my mom, I don't know if she's really a typical ESFP, but I found her hard to type. But I think ultimately, I think that's probably the best fit. So they're definitely both sensors. Everybody in my family is a sensor, for sure.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I hear that story a lot from intuitives. They're the only
Yeah.
intuitive in the family.
Yeah, well, intuitives are a lot rarer. But yeah, I don't actually. I get along well with my family, though. I mean, to me, it's I always had a sense that there were like that most of the things that I am interested in, my family is not interested in.
Mm-hmm.
Like that was always obvious to me. It was sort of like how you talked about when you're hearing intuitives in a conversation that you find yourself tuning it out because it's just not like I've experienced that my whole life. Like, but to me, it was never. It was never. It just seemed. I just had to be practical about it. It's like, okay, they're not interested in a lot of these things that I'm really interested in, but they don't have a problem with me being interested in it. They don't care about it as much as I do. They don't, you know, but at the same time, like, I feel like any intuitive should really be able to connect with a sensor because we all live in the sensory world. I mean, there are always things to talk about, you know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like, I don't know. I mean, that whole sensor intuitive, the SN divide. I mean, it's still kind of a new topic for me, and I know I've
Yeah.
talked about it a few times, but it's like, you know,
Uh-huh.
I still try to get a sense of like what the intuitive, like what is the main communication issue that intuitives would have with sensors, and like it seems like it's more of what's not there than what's there. Is that kind of the case? Like in your
Um,
case, like your family members not being interested in what you're talking, just not reciprocating when
yeah.
you're talking about stuff. Because like that's how it is with me. Like when I'm talking, like I'm not trying to tune out when I talk with intuitives. It's just
No,
like,
that's exactly right. Now, I mean, have always been able to perceive that about. That's why when you said that, I was like, yeah, I think that's right because that's what I've always observed in my dynamic with my family is that they've always been totally accepting of me. That's the thing. I've never felt like anybody
yeah,
was telling me it's bad that you're an intuitive. You need to stop being that way. You need to be like us. You need to be like the sensors. It was never like that. And so I couldn't really take it that personally. It was sort of like, okay, well, they're not interested in the stuff that I am. I can't talk to them about poetry, that's fine. I have other
yeah,
things to talk about. Um, I never felt like I had to be something other than what I am, you know. Like they've always been able to see that I'm different from them. And, um, and, yeah, but at the same time, I don't know. I've had intuitives that I had more communication issues with, which is why I can't see it as this like divide that all sensors on one end and all intuitives on the other end, and you all communicate in a different way. I'm going to communicate better with a sensor who shares my same cognitive preferences than I am with, say, an INFP who is an FI dom, because introverted feeling is a function that I have a hard time understanding. Um, and so it doesn't mean that you can't still find a way to communicate. My best friend is an ENFP. We don't share any cognitive functions, but our functions are in the same, like the stack is the same order. So she's a dominant intuitive. She's a feeler. We're still oriented similarly so that we get along really well. We kind of end up valuing a lot of the same things, but our communication is very different. Like we perceive different things and we come to conclusions in different ways. But it's just sort of interesting but I still find myself tired after talking to her because extroverted intuition is so different from introverted intuition. To say all intuitives naturally get
yeah.
along well, naturally communicate well. I have not found that to be the case necessarily. Um,
Hmm. That's interesting because I've like other INFJs have told me like that they really love talking with with any users, like
yeah,
the
I've heard that
NI and
too.
NE feeds off of each other. But yeah, it sounds like it's
Yeah.
totally different in your case.
Yeah, I know. I love talking to my best friend. Like, I mean, we do have great conversations, um, but to me, it's not the level of depth that I have with an NI user. For me, NI it's, it's, that's a connection that there's just nothing like it. That's where I'm able to connect with somebody and it's effortless and it's just, it's like mind meld. It's very rare. I've only known a handful of of NI-DOMs in my life, and it's always we're friends. We just like we just understand everything about each other. It's weird.
Okay, so you're talking about like you've known some INTJs.
Yeah. Yeah, but you know what? Want to know what's interesting is that most of my experience with introverted intuition, I think this is one of the reasons I've always been such a big reader, is that most of my experiences with introverted intuition, both INTJs and INFJs, has been through books, because I think they're overrepresented in literature, poetry, philosophy. There's a lot of that's a lot of introverted intuition. As far as meeting introverted intuitives in real life, there's only been a few that I've
Okay.
known for sure. I mean, it's possible that because there are variations and there are subtypes and things like that. I think there are INFJs and INTJs. I think there are INTJs who are using their extroverted thinking a lot more, and there are INFJs who are using their extroverted feeling a lot more, especially since that is the extroverted function, that might be how they're connecting with people. And so it might not always be immediately obvious, where if somebody's like, if someone's, sort of maybe it's people who have to be unbalanced in the same way that I am, but just that I like end up zeroing in on that if somebody is just like super NI all the time. I don't know. Just like in their own heads, like I don't know.
How would you know though? Because like it's an introverted function, and so.